What's up and welcome. Dreadlock Pac here, aka BigBwainWarlockMain, and today I like to talk builds and elemental wells. One of my favorite things to do in Destiny, besides the Crucible, is to make builds. Build crafting has always been a thing in Destiny, and has really came a long way since the vanilla of D2. Over the past few seasons, Bungie seems to be focused on giving us more and more ways to customize, tweak, and tailor-make our Guardians, specifically the way that we dream, and it doesn't seem like they're about to stop anytime soon. In fact, I'm willing to bet my ghost that Bungie is going to double down in the fast-approaching Witch Queen, Season of the Risen, and beyond. And so today, in this video, I like to do a quick and simple overview and crash course of the options and tools that we currently have available on the tail end of this season for build crafting. Those tools being elemental wells. Every set of elemental wells seem to follow a specific theme, and the goal of this video is to explore and showcase multiple themes to give you a general scope of what's possible, and hopefully inspire you to make your own light-wielding legend. So, before we get started, I'd like to preface this by saying all of the builds showcased in this video should be Omni-class, meaning work on any class. The only restrictions are that you have the elemental armor affinity and you own the mods. I also tried to pair these builds with blend synergies so that you could just get a general overall concept free of any perks or fragments enhancing or modifying them. And so, with that preface out of the way, let's get started. If you feel you have a good grip on these mods though and want to skip straight to the builds, jump to here. But for everyone else that's either new, old, or a returning player that needs a refresher, buckle up, because here comes the crash course. So, what are elemental wells? Well, I like to think of elemental wells as the close cousins to orbs. By equipping an elemental well mod, the generator I like to call it, and meeting its conditions, guardians can spawn elemental wells. And at base, every elemental well collected will grant energy to your lowest current ability on cooldown. If the elemental well matches your affinity, then it will grant energy to all of your abilities. And you can further take advantage of these wells by equipping other mods that will grant a variety of different effects. Each elemental affinity seems to revolve around a certain core theme, and the more and more you experiment and tinker with them, the more evident that theme becomes. There's also a general set of elemental mods, things like Melee Well Maker and Elemental Ordnance, that have no affinity but are more so tied to your equipped subclass. Now, these complement your Guardian's builds and can be slotted on any elemental armor affinity, whereas mods like Supreme Well Maker, Bountiful Wells, these are more tied to specific elemental affinities and must be slotted on the corresponding elemental armor. Some mods may generate wells, while others may replenish your class ability, grenade energy, or just grant a unique effect for a short duration. And so, for posterity's sake, I wanted to make a commemoration of all the current elemental well mods pre-Witch Queen for anyone that just needed a general reference. Now, before we dive deeper, let's take a glance at this chart I constructed. This is more like a cheat sheet that I use from time to time when making builds. Every mod from left to right, which is the row, fits that elemental affinity, while the mod in every column, top to bottom, relate to each other by what they do. So for instance, the first column are all well generators, regardless of affinity, while the third column modifies what the actual well does, gives it certain traits or characteristics. All the mods in the fourth column grant your Guardian a unique time-limited effect depending on that elemental well. Now, for demonstration purposes, I lean into every elemental well mod in the ability regen category just to give you a visual of what's possible while I skim and go over each elemental well in each category. But feel free to refer to that visual and screenshot it at any time. I personally find it easier to make builds on the fly when I have a visual of what's available, especially when experimenting on classes and exotics that I'm not completely familiar with. Ideas and inspiration seem to come more naturally. Remember, knowledge is powerful, but it's the application of knowledge which is power. And so, let's start with the stasis thing. For this demonstration, I slotted elemental shards, which will convert the stasis shards into elemental wells, basically self-generating, and then I used 4 Well of Restorations that will grant me additional energy for my ability with the lowest energy. And the generator of the stasis family, Supreme Wellmaker, spawns 3 stasis wells when you cast your super. Now the unique ability gain of the stasis family, Elemental Time Dilation, is essential to extending other unique ability gains such as Font of Might and Font of Wisdom. One of the topics that the Bungie devs touched upon during the recent Vidoc and reveal were that they were trying to expand and establish a foundation of verbs that lean into the identity of elemental affinities. I believe even Kevin Yanez stated regarding the future Solar 3.0 that the solar element is about burning and healing. Now you can really see these personalities shine through in these mods the more that you use them, and the theme of stasis to me seems to play the role of the wild card, where it enhances or tweak what your elemental wells already do. More like a accent, you know, flavor the sauce. Alright, so let's move on to the next element. Now, let's explore the blazing potential of the Solar Affinity. Its core identity seems to be centered around your grenade, explosive damage, and healing. Just like every other elemental affinity, you have your generator, your well modifier, your ability regain, and your unique ability gain. The generator of this family, Explosive Well Maker, by rapidly defeating combatants with explosive damage, spawns a solar elemental well. Now, explosive damage is pretty straightforward and simple. You got your grenades, grenade launcher, rockets, dragonfly, hive launcher, pretty much anything that is classified as go boom. Unfortunately for Rasputin, Warmon cells do seem to be the exception here. Highly recommend these for the Guardians that like explosions, you know, the grenader of the team. The ability regenerator of the Solar family is Well of Ordnance. Solar wells collected grant additional grenade energy. Copies of this mod actually stack, which is a theme that's being displayed on screen. Now, I got a weird feeling that Lord Shax must have had a hand in these solar mods after he got fresh out of Mayhem. Now, the well modifier of this solar family is Bountiful Wells. Mods that spawn wells can now stack, spawning additional wells for each copy of the mod equipped. This mod is powerful in combination with other mods that can create some pretty wild snowballing builds. Now, the last member of the solar family, the unique ability gain, is Well of Life. Solar elemental wells collected grant increased regeneration for a short period of time. Think of it like a personal mini healing rift for a brief period. Now, this is extremely invaluable to the Guardians that find themselves in the heat of the fight and can't take a moment for cover. Remember, even though the window of healing is brief, regen normally doesn't start in Destiny until the damage stops. So with the right setup, you can blaze ahead with the power of soul in hand and carve a path of destructive light through time. Sorry, a little bit too much anime logic last night, but hopefully you get what I'm trying to say, and hopefully the elemental themes start to become more clear and evident the more elements we cover and the more that you use them. And so let's arc over to our next link in the chain, and that is Arc. The elemental affinity of Arc seems to be linked around all things melee. This is for the Guardian that bought the Zavala Fight Club Season Pass. The generator of the Arc family, Overcharge Wellmaker, may be one of the best generators across all elements, bang for buck wise. Let me explain what I mean. Defeating a combatant with a finisher spawns 2 Arc Elemental Wells, creating an insane output of Elemental Wells for very little input. Not to mention how easy it is to perform a finisher on any ad. I have a suspicion that this mod may also shoot up in value if the way that we defeat Hive Ghosts count as a finisher in Witch Queen. So, sticking to the same thing, the ability regenerator of the Arc family, Well of Striking, will grant melee energy when collecting Arc Wells. Now, this is a stackable mod as well, perfect for those builds where you invest everything into melee and you still can't get your melee charge. I recommend using Well of Striking. Now, the Arc Well modifier of the group, Seeking Wells, makes your wells that you create move across the ground towards players similar to ionic traces and a fragment on the stasis that pulls the shards in. You can picture how this would be useful in intense settings, something like a GM or a raid encounter where you have to be stationary and maybe defend a plate or guard a conflux, or think like the train strategy on the Devil's Lair. The general radius is pretty good, I would say around 15 to 10 meters. Now the final mod of the Arc family, Well of Ions, Arc Elemental Wells collected causes your next melee to deal increased damage, which is 30% when it works. I'll show you what I mean by that later, but 30% more damage is nothing to scoff at, and according to the sources I checked, it does indeed stack with other buffs. Just be mindful to double check your actual damage numbers, because one class in particular showed no increase to melee damage. But regardless, I can hear you Guardians cracking your knuckles now at the thought of challenging a raid boss to fisticuffs. Now let's gaze into the abyss and try not to get sucked up into the void. And last but not least, the final member of the Elemental Affinity family, we have Void Elemental Wells. Now, Void's overarching theme seems to center around increasing your overall survivability by granting a damage resist bonus and leaning into your Guardian's core ability, like their class ability, what they specialize in. So for instance, Warlocks are known for their recovery and placing rifts. Titans are naturally known for being tanky, resilient juggernauts and their barricades, while the nimble grass hunter focuses on having high mobility so they can dodge as often as possible and be extremely evasive. The Void Affinity seems to capitalize and enhance on these core features of each respective Guardian. Alright, so the generator of the Void family is the Reaping Well Maker. After using your class ability, your next weapon Final Blow on a combatant will spawn a Void Elemental Well. This Elemental Well is probably one of the most carefree wells to produce, and it's also one of the best ones to use in my opinion as far as gameplay loop, because you're already going to be using your class ability naturally, so it kind of doesn't break the flow. And because this generator revolves around your class ability, you don't have to go out of your way to make these. Now the ability regenerator of the Void family is Well of Utility. While picking up a Void Elemental Well, it will grant you more class ability, and you can see how this is extremely synergistic with the previous Reaping Well Maker mod. The Well modifier of the Void family tweaks the Elemental Well to make it last longer, which is Enduring Well, and that can be extremely useful for those high dense situations where you just can't leave where you're at right there, and a second longer will make a lifetime of difference. And the final member of the Void Elemental family is Well of Tenacity. Picking up a Void Elemental Well will reduce the damage you take from Guardians for a short period of time, and upon consuming the Void Elemental Well, you'll gain a 10% damage reduction for 10 seconds. And you can mix and match this one with other mods such as Elemental Time Dilation to extend the time of it, and you could also use things like Protective Light to cover up the bottom half, while Well of Tenacity will cover the top half. Think like Under Pressure. Alright, so now let's get into the solar elemental builds. Alright, now that you have a general grip on the well mods and what they do, let's get to constructing some creative universal builds. Starting off with solar, same thought process as the first section, we're going to lean heavily into every elemental theme. For this first build, I like to call it Explosive Well Walker. Now the mods we're going to utilize are going to be Explosive Well Maker, 3 Well of Ordinances, and Bountiful Wells. With 3 Well of Ordinances, we regain around 30% of our grenade energy upon collecting a solar well, while Bountiful Wells allows us to have 2 wells to benefit from whenever our explosive damage creates them. Perfect for the triple grenade launcher loadout, or where all you do is rain explosions and destructions, or when you want to overcommit to your grenade and make Lord Shaxx proud in PvE. You might as well take advantage and benefit from these explosions, and because Explosive Well Maker is tied directly to explosive defeats themselves, you can see how this setup will work on any class and how it could benefit or complement some more than others. There are some classes and fragments that may dip into these areas even further, or just have very powerful grenades with very low cooldowns, and they could benefit from a setup such as this. And if we ever get a new solar generator, it's just a quick interchangeable swap with Explosive Well Maker. This is a build I like to call Icarus Gift. For this build, you're going to want a solar elemental generator, elemental charge so you can become charged with light, firepower to feed off of that charge, and to stick with the same thing, Well of Ordnance and Bountiful Wells. This is a version of a build spread a bit thin. However, is really just to showcase to you that you can create a hybrid elemental build, which might be useful to you depending on what you find to synergize it with. In a solo setting, it might not be an engine that functions as efficiently as others. However, imagine this in a fire team where at least one other person is generating solar elemental wells. Then both ordnance and firepower will have greater uptime. The main point I guess I'm trying to convey is that it is possible to build craft, whether it be niche, broken, useless, or somewhere in the middle. We have some really creative tools with these elemental wells. Before, the loop or the scenario was get charged with light with orbs, and unless you were using your super, orbs were mostly made by double kills with weapons, which made for an immersive, breaking, uncomfortable loop. Now, by investing and putting a lot of effort into your build, you may be able to generate a more comfortable loop that doesn't really break your gameplay flow and allows for more build dedication, creativity, and diversity. That's what I like to think about elemental wells and what they bring to the build crafting table. And overall, you really only have 3 build limiters, 4 if you count your creativity, those being your overall armor stats, your mod space and availability, and your elemental affinity. But all 3 of these can be navigated and circumvented to a degree the deeper our knowledge and experience goes with these mods, and the more unique and crafty combinations can be constructed over time. Now, the third build is one I like to call Sea Firepower. Extremely simple and straightforward. In this build display, I use the word subclass Wellmaker. 3 firepowers and elemental charge. The reason why is because you want to generate a well that matches your subclass. Here, you can use any mod that matches. Reason being, if it matches, you gain charge with light ×2, not only making the well more efficient, but it also allows for more freedom instead of being tied down to a specific generator. Say you have a really awesome melee build and you like and enjoy creating elemental wells with your melee. Well, you can generate them with Melee Wellmaker. It'll match, and this makes a nice loop to where your melee actually feeds your grenade. And with 3 firepower mods, you gain around 40% of your grenade back, as you see when I toss a grenade. And so, even though this is pretty straightforward, you see how with a little bit of tinkering, you can actually make and get more efficiency out of whichever elemental well mod you slot. And so, the sky is the limit. Get creative. Alright. Alright, 4th time's the charm. I like to call this build Healing Ordnance. Still on the solar affinity, but on any class. Now, you can use subclass Wellmaker, any here, elemental charge to gain 2 charges of light, 2 firepowers because we like our grenades, and then the last mod, Heal Thyself. This build is made for the Guardian that would like to rock a destructive yet healing loadout. In scenarios where there are maybe too many ads to count, a well-placed grenade could do a lot of damage, and a little bit of healing could go a long way. You can see how this would be clutch and would be useful in generic gameplay. One thing to note, because you have 2 mods, Firepower and Heal Thyself, feeding into the charge with Light Pool, you might want to keep in mind that whichever effect takes priority will always consume the first charge. What do I mean? Well, in situations where you only have 1 charge with light, the mod with priority will always consume it and the secondary effect will not be available. Just a little nugget of knowledge or something you want to keep in mind. But again, really showcases what kind of build crafting is possible in the current sandbox. Okay, the final Solar Affinity themed build I would like to showcase is called Solar's Grace. This build is for the lazy type of Guardian. Yeah, regenerates faster than Majin Buu. Maybe you're always in the thicket and you just don't have time to look for cover, and you can use some mobile healing. Well, for this build, we are going to slide in as many well of lives as we can, so 3 in this case, And because we aren't a complete deadbeat guardian, we're going to use a solar well generator and elemental time dilation. So this neat little loop, by picking up a solar elemental well, pretty much gives your guardian a 20-second constant tick regen. And because healing normally doesn't start until you stop taking damage for a few seconds, you can kind of ignore this rule and stay right there in the fight. Just remember, it's healing, not immortality. So hopefully you have a great feel of the solar, and let's see what other builds we can make with the arc. Alright, the first arc theme build follows the same overall vein, one I like to call Striking Overcharge. For this build, we're going to need an arc well maker, so Overcharge well maker, 3 well of strikings to gain a significant melee boost per well, and then Bountiful well as on the extra utility of being able to produce an extra well to the 2 that we're already making with every finisher. And so with this initial setup, with every finisher, we're making 3 arc wells and gaining almost a full melee charge once we take our time to collect all 3 wells. One of the little nuggets of knowledge that I did notice is that with Overcharge well maker, you might want to try to perform your finisher in open spaces, because I think some of the elemental wells might clip behind environments depending on what structures are surrounding. But pay attention to your actual melee charge, because sometimes I also notice that your guardian seems to collect them in the animation cycle of the finisher. And one last piece of info I would like to share is that when it comes to collecting the wells, try to space them out by maybe about half a second, because collecting them too fast will not produce as much of a bonus as they would if you were to space them. The window is very brief. However, I did seem to notice that there was a window. The second arc elemental build, Bionic Ions, are for my guardians that got that subscription to that fight club. This build makes use of the arc well maker again, 3 well of ions, and an elemental time dilation for a 20-second buff. But the buff will go away with your next melee attack, but it also boosts that power by that melee attack by 30%. Now, I tested this with Middle Tree Hammer and got no increase in damage whatsoever, as I'm displaying on screen. I don't know if it was something I was doing wrong or if there was just a damage number I didn't see, but I hit the same damage number each time with and without the buff. So I took this build into our favorite community lost sector, called the Cabal, and redid this test on Top Tree Arc. Now, as you can see, this time the 30% damage actually checked out. And according to the other sources that I checked, this buff does indeed stack with other external buffs such as 1-2 punch. So you can pretty much see how this can skyrocket and are made for you melee centered players. Now, the last arc theme build, which is a complete overkill, and I love it. This is a build I like to call Major Armstrong. Shout out to my people who get that reference. And so the goal of this build revolves around how fast a melee focused build can regain its melee charge. I know that's pretty much the core theme of all these arc elemental builds, but like I said, with this one, this is particularly overkill. So the mods I use on this build is Arc Well Maker again, Elemental Charge to become Charge with Light ×2, Well of Striking so you gain a melee benefit from those wells, and then the star of the show, Heavy Handed, which will always get us to half of our melee charge back once we used our melee charge when we're charged with light. And so I'm pretty sure you can see how all of these pieces of the engine are working specifically towards regaining your melee, and I really like how creative this loop feels and allows for an insane melee uptime. The only thing that I didn't really like is how the general finisher breaks your overall gameplay flow. But I mean, at the end of the day, this is a very small price to pay for that much fun that you can execute. Alright, here's the display, and let's get into Void. And last but not least, let's gaze into the abyss and step into the void. The first build, that I'm sure you can guess by now, takes on the same core concept, just with a little bit of sugar, water, purple. It's a build I like to call Whispering Void, which consists of Reaping Well Maker, 3 Well of Utilities, and Bountiful Wells. As you can see, like the previous builds, this one in particular really speaks for itself. Whispering Void is really about taking what it means to be your particular class to the absolute limit and pushing it past the peak. Just make sure that you throw in a simple pause between grabbing the wheels, but other than that, man, this build is perfect if your Guardian's class ability is maxed out and you want to get it even faster. The beautiful thing is, this gameplay loop is a seamless flow compared to the others, and it doesn't really ask anything for you. Just play your Guardian to his strengths. As you can see, every time I collect a Void Elemental Well, I'm gaining a significant increase into my class ability energy, creating an almost infinite perpetual loop. And these are some of my favorite loops in Destiny. Alright, let's move on to the second Void. The second Void stepping setup has the nickname Resolute Well Walker, where you want a Void Well Maker, 3 Well of Tenacities, and an Elemental Time Dilation. Well of Tenacity will grant a 10% damage reduction, and with Time Dilation, you get up to 14 seconds with this whole setup equipped. Now, you can see how this might come in handy during extremely difficult encounters where perhaps you're maybe under leveled or you're taking a constant barrage of damage and constantly even getting one shot. This might actually change that. Maybe, in fact, it might be useful for the legendary difficulty campaign or perhaps the Grandmaster Nightfall. It also has a cool wispy void effect at the bottom of the screen, similar to the Prophecy Dungeon, to let you know that you got it on at all times. And so, this is a demonstration of it with and without the resist, and you see, you kind of can tell the difference. Now, for the extreme end, you have the option to go full on resist. This is a pretty niche build. This is a build I would like to slap in the niche category. You have Void Well Walker, Void Well Maker, Elemental Charge, Protective Light, Well of Tenacity, and Elemental Time Dilation. Now, this one is like another hybrid build, taking advantage of the Charge with Light and Well mods at the same time. The cool thing is that this showcases that you end up having resist on the top half, and once your shield break, Protective Light triggers for the bottom half, similar to something like Under Pressure. Another example of build spreading thin, yet creating a unique and favorable niche for the particular Guardian. And you guys can name this one. I was thinking of Protective Shadow. And now taking what we know, we're going to create a few unique and still universal builds. I like to showcase this particular one on Stasis, but remember, all of these builds should work on every single class. This is for the Guardians that want to get their super extremely fast, the 50% super game variant, and the usual generic setup: Elemental Charge, Supercharge, Charged Up so we can get 5 charges, and an Energy Converter. When throwing our grenade, we'll gain up to 50% of our first half of super. And because we're on Stasis, we're going to use Elemental Shards, which pretty much converts our grenade into the energy that we're going to convert into our super. And so, as you see here, just keep in mind Elemental Shards does have a 5-second cooldown, and depending on how many buffs you have on the screen, you might not even be able to tell it's active, but this is just demonstration. And now, moving on to you Guardians that like to just do damage, I haven't forgot about y'all. This is one build, really didn't give it a name, but this is what taking Font of Might times 3, Elemental Time Dilation, and then a charging element that matches your damage. This one increases your weapon's damage by 25%. As you see, I hit for 3150 here. Destroy this ad and create a arc weld. Picking up the buff will grant me a 20-second 25% damage buff with this current setup. And almost every damage phase lasts less than 25 seconds, so you can see how valuable this is. And now the last build is a build that has been making the rounds pretty regularly and is one of the best ones as far as overall damage. You want to be able to stack high energy fire and Font of Might, and so in order to do that, you just want to make sure that you produce an elemental well that matches your subclass, as well as having weapons that match in the same vein. And by doing this, both of your weapons will not only feed off of Font of Might, but they'll also feed off of high energy fire, giving you a substantial increase in DPS numbers. And as you can see, the first damage numbers are way less than the second one. And so, that's all the elemental builds I got showcased for today. And one last look at the chart, just in case you wanted to screenshot it or you just need it as a general reference. Remember, creativity is the only limiter here. So, get out there, experiment, make a new build with one of your favorite subclasses or just something that you haven't used before. You know, one of my thought processes when I go through making a new build is to ask myself, what is the build trying to achieve? What's the goal? What am I trying to do? Am I trying to stay alive? Am I trying to do more damage? Spam grenades, you know? Once you get this build core goal foundation built with as little mods as possible so it can be efficient, then you can really branch out and help supplement and cover whatever weaknesses you may have while doubling down on the overall loop or the core. And with the new changes to armor, elemental affinity, being able to change it with just the one upgrade module, it should be easier than ever to craft and experiment more than before. And so, in closing, I know this was a long one, but I wanted to try and demonstrate various different themes across all classes so no one felt left out, and I wanted to showcase just how much potential is out there. The Keen-Eye Guardian will also notice how no exotics were built into any of these builds, meaning that you can take all of this even further. There's even more synergy to be tapped into. So, I hope everyone found at least some use out of this video, and let me know down below, have you been using any of these builds, and if not, what was your favorite 3, you know? Do you plan on taking any of these into the Witch Queen Day 1? My favorite 3 were, I would say, Whispering Void, Elemental Power, and Healing Ordnance. And so, that's all I got for today. Do me a solid. If you like what you see, triple tap that like button for me. And if you enjoyed the vibe, subscribe. This has been me in the present, talking to you from the past. Hope to see you in the future.